We've got a panel this morning, as Pastor Teresa said. We're going to talk about meaningful connections. We're created for a connection with God. That's a lovely thing about our faith, is that right back, as Teresa said in Genesis 2:18, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone, right? So we're created for a connection with God, and we're created for a connection with each other. And, you know, Pastor Billy Graham is often quoted as saying is that man has a God-sized vacuum or a God-sized hole that can only be filled by God through his son, Jesus Christ. So that's going to be the topic for this morning. It is a big discussion, but who better to have the discussion in my esteemed panel here? We've got Mr. David Unwin. We've got the lovely Kat Walker. And we've got the handsome Dan Bowman on the end there. So, I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Let's kick it off. So the question that I'm going to ease us into, and it also sets and defines terms for our discussion, is, I better have a look. What are meaningful relationships, and why are they important in the context of a church community? So we'll, ladies before gentlemen, so we're going to start with David. No. We'll go from my right to left. So we'll start with you, David.
Yeah, well, I guess like Sundays are a day for corporate worship, and so it's there's a necessity to sort of move past that relationship where we're just here and we're saying hi to each other and we're just individually worshipping. But yeah, like that whole idea of meaningful relationships that can be gained is just so important for moving past that point and just sharing on a personal level and supporting each other on a personal level. So having Christian friends to mentor you, to help you move into that space, not just here on Sunday, but throughout your week, and just support you, work and journey alongside you as Christians. So yeah, meaningful relationships are, just so important to my personal faith. Like I'm just looking around the room and just even, so many of you have inputted to me, and I'm just so appreciative to have these people with me. It's to me, it's about that personal connection and support that can be gained from that.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Kat?
So when I was thinking about this question, kind of like praying about it, I honestly was brought to that picture of that is described in Acts 2 where, straight after the day of Pentecost, there was an overflow that came into the church, and it was this thing. It's actually, I think it's in the end of Acts, it's called the Fellowship of the Believers. And all of a sudden there was an overflow of the Holy Spirit, and believers began to gather together. It said they went to church daily. They started selling their possessions. The rich would sell to look after the poor. They were eating together. They were having meals. They were doing life together. And it became this thing where it was this cycle, and I was like, God, do we have to go to church every day? And then I honestly felt like God said no, but the overflow and the real, like when the Holy Spirit is on you, your relationships are deeper and you extended further, both spiritually but also physically. So I think you want to eat together, you want to do life together. When someone's like, we've had someone pass this week, the family of God is gathering around together. When people are going through hard times or when their relationships are being stressed, we're like not leaning back, but we're leaning in together. We're gathering, practically bringing in meals, and it's both spiritual and physical. So for me, that's really when I can see someone doing that, I know that they're leaning into God and that's a Christian, right? That's the Christian life. For me, that's
wonderful. Thank you. It's a pretty high bar there, Dan.
I was going to say the same thing. Yep. What Kat said.
That's all I've got.
But Dan, I guess you, amongst the panel here, you've had decades in this church, right? So in terms of meaningful relationships for you, what are they? And I guess...
Yeah. I think in church life, the longer you're here, I think you get to a point where you have relationship at some level with probably most people in church. I think meaningful relationships, the word, I think Kat touched on it before, they have depth to them.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, there's going to be Sunday-only connections that you just connect with people on a Sunday, and, you know, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But, yeah, the meaningful ones are the Monday to Sunday ones, through every trial, through every celebration, through every season. But they've got depth to them, I think. And, yeah, it works both ways. You know, you encourage each other, you support each other, you love upon each other, you're generous towards each other, you're vulnerable with each other. So, yeah, just genuine depth is what I think of when I think of a meaningful relationship.
Yeah, wonderful. And I like that, the analogy of depth, right? And that probably flows on to the next question I have. In Proverbs 27:17, it says, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And I guess in order to actually live that out, a relationship needs to have depth. So I guess how do these relationships support our spiritual walk? How can they benefit, I guess, our spiritual walk? David?
Yeah, look, it's, for me personally, it's when you're journeying in a meaningful relationship, in a close relationship with someone, you're coming alongside and you're allowing that person to have input to your life. And so you're not setting yourself up as teachers, but I mean, you know, we used to sing a song years ago, Brother, Let Me Be Your Servant. So you're sort of allowing someone to come and, like Jesus, wash your feet. And so that's a really vulnerable thing. And so in that space of vulnerability, you're allowing people to have input to your life. And you know, like most of us, that's not something we'll just do immediately. It's something we have to sort of develop relationship and connection to then allow people to move into that space. Because, you know, I know for myself, like, and I'm sure my wife would attest to this, there's a lot of things that need to change. And so, you know, like it's just great to have people that, you know, like the marriage relationship is great for that, but also relationship between Christian brothers and sisters where we allow people to move past that sort of just superficial friendship phase and actually say, hey, I've seen this and maybe that needs to change, or hey, I see you doing that and I want to be part of that too. So it's a correction thing, but it's an inspiration thing. So it's that allowing that, I would call it authenticity, so that allowing people to not just be superficial and move past that friendship phase into like I want to intentionally input into your life and I want to receive your input. I want to be like you and I want you to be like me. And so just being Jesus to each other, and we've mentioned a few of those sort of examples when that might happen, like in a caring situation when someone has a deep need, but it can also be celebration, you know, like supporting each other through the birth of children, through marriages, through relationships. So yeah, just lots of positive things to be gained from moving past that superficial level.
Yep. And I guess, Kat, before we go to you, you've probably had some experience in the last couple of years coming back after decades away. Now, obviously, you had relationships already, but it had been a long time. So how did you, I guess, feel coming back and sort of reintroducing yourself in new relationships, etc.?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So, little quick snapshot of our backstory, but Josh and my husband and I were here for the first 10 years of the church and then went to university in Brisbane, and then, 25 years later, we moved back. So the church is a completely different church, completely different faces, but the heart remained the same, which is great. So we've come in and we know it's a safe place, we know it's a good place, but when we came back, before we even came, we're bringing back these pre-teenage kids, and we started praying about friendship. We already were praying before we got here because we knew we were leaving. We'd been in Canada for 10 years, and we had this deep relationship that we knew we were leaving. We didn't want to let that go. It's like family when you have to move home. So we're moving to a new place, and we've got this heart like, how are we going to fit in? How are we going to make this work? And, there's some really, it's almost typical, but it's the things that the church has set up that actually helped us. So the first thing was that we got invited to Andrew and Miranda Davis's Connect group. And Fiona actually invited us, which I can say that was a relationship that was already here for us that had started when I was 16. We were this odd couple, and I think one of the gifts that God gives us in church is that we are friends with someone that we may not be friends with outside of church. So I was 16, she was 21. I think she felt sorry for me at that time. She kind of looked after me. It's a God relationship though, because all these years later we came back and Fiona had gone and come back at the same time. And she invited us to Connect Group, and that just anchored us. It gave us something, because when we got back here, everyone was wearing masks. It was actually not an immediate, we were like, who are these people? We don't know their faces. And we needed to go to someone's home and be anchored. So we started building those relationships. And it takes time. We're 2 years in and I feel like, oh yeah, this is family. But we had to let that happen naturally. And I just encourage anyone who's new and you're nervous about joining a Connect. It was gold for us. That's
Awesome.
really what's brought us in.
So good. Dan, I guess, the question is, how can meaningful relationships support our spiritual walk and our family, etc.?
Support it. They're crucial. They're so crucial. Having meaningful and deep and genuine relationships can help your spiritual walk, your family, your every element of your life. It takes time. It takes effort. We didn't just turn up and all of a sudden had just a huge, big family full of close friends. We had to put ourselves out there to join a group, to join a team, and just make connection with people. So there was that element of, okay, if we want meaningful relationships, we've got to start that ball rolling. And I'm so glad we did. I mean, we've got so many incredibly close friendships of people who go to church, who don't go to church, but who have been there through every season that we've been in. And spiritually, I know that we wouldn't be where we are now if it hadn't been for key people that God placed in our world, and are still there. Through and I think that's what meaningful relationships are when you're going through a challenging season. It's people who can actually love on you and be there for you, but aren't afraid to correct you and guide you as well. They're not just yes people. Mm-hmm. They don't just jump on your bandwagon and agree with everything you say. Whatever. A season for us is when our, speaking of relationships, when our marriage went through an extremely challenging season a few years ago, and it was messy. It was about 18 months of us living separately, and we've got young kids, and it was the toughest thing we've ever had to walk through. And and I just, and the marriage we have now is a marriage I couldn't even begin to pray for. It's that, and it's not so much because of us, but it's because of God ultimately, but the people that He's placed around our world. We had close friends who wouldn't take my side, wouldn't take Trisha's side, but took our side. And, people like Sandy and Shorty are absolute pillars in our world. They're just phenomenal. They're not, Shorty, he hugged me, he supported me, encouraged me, he told me to stop being a buffhead and pull my head in as well. And, but told me the things that I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear, and it was awesome. And, and Dave and Marine, there's so many people who have just been there at our worst and at our best, and that's helped our spiritual walk, because it's allowed us to draw closer to God. And what they've done is they've pointed us closer to God. Yep. They haven't given us not necessarily life-changing advice. They've encouraged us, but they've just pointed us towards Jesus, press into God, turn up to church, and that's what we did, and we couldn't have done it without those friendships. So.
Love it. I love it. And I think of Pastor John preached when he kicked off the series a couple of weeks ago around the types of friendships, and he talked about the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego friendship. And what you're talking about there is the Jethro friendship, which is the mentor that you allow to speak into your life. And I love that story, Dan. Amazing. I'm going to change tack a little bit, right? So this morning when I was in kids' church, I saw at least 3 new families I hadn't seen before, which is amazing. I love seeing new families come into the church. That's a hard thing, though, when you're coming into a new church, right? And I guess, David, over the last 12 to 18 months, you've sort of come into church to the point where you're now running a fantastic Connect group. I hear such great things about it. So tell us about your experience and how you sort of made those relationships.
Yeah, well, my my initial start here at the church was a bit rocky, and so yeah, I'm super grateful for this church. So I came here as a sick person. I physically had a sickness, and I was waiting for surgery, and that surgery came up, and this church was just amazing. So, we moved to the coast wanting to be part of this congregation. I had been, Kylie, my wife's sister, had been attending here for years narrowly, and we had visited sometimes on holiday, so it was a great church. We really wanted to be here. We knew we didn't try anywhere else. We came to C3. We came up the coast and we came to C3. But I wasn't a well person. The church was just so awesome in the way that it gathered around us as a new family. And that just blows us away. We've been in church world our whole lives, but this church just does some things. Sorry, this church does everything really well, but they do care so well. They do care so well. And we just felt really loved on. And we were new, and we didn't feel like anyone would know us or know what I was struggling with. Just even standing here in church, when I first came, I was sitting. I couldn't stand to praise God, and I really love praising God. Worship's a big thing for me. But I'm healed, and that's awesome. But we just received so much support, and so as well as receiving that support, we are used to, as a couple, and opening our home and just wanting to welcome people as well. So it was just awesome to, first of all, be welcomed, and that to have that, I guess, what we'd been pouring into people's lives in other churches for years, receiving that was just, was such a blessing and just really helped me through. So I really want to honour everyone who was involved in those parts and processes, the pastoral team and just even people that gathered around us. So awesome for that. That was my start. But part of sort of moving through that, I'm a businessman, and so I really love the Pathfinders part. I want to give that a big plug today. And at the time, Pastor Ian was really proactive in getting me along to that. And so, we had this friendship with the Dimmons, and they invited us to their Connect group. And they're just an awesome couple, and we really felt immediately welcomed into the church as we joined into Connect. And so, we were used to hosting in our own home. So when the opportunity came up and we were asked to host, we weren't so hesitant about that. We were really awesome. Look, I've got to be honest, when home group's at your place, it's much easier to attend, am I right? So, host a group. But it's also great, to be worshipping God in your own house. How good is that? So to be bringing other people in, it's great for your children. My children are now adults. They live upstairs in our home, my 3 boys. But it's just great for them to see us putting our faith into action in a group. And so for them to observe that as well. Okay. I've forgotten the question, but hopefully that's answered it.
And David, you touched on something that's really an integral part of our church, and that's Connect groups. And so, Kat, I'll change the question slightly to you in terms of the importance of Connect groups in sort of maintaining, developing those relationships.
Yeah, so great question. So my husband Josh and I we've been Connect group leaders now for 3 Connect groups.
Awesome. And so for the newcomers in church, tell us what they are and what they involve.
Yeah, so for us, as I said before, we started going to Andrew Miranda's early on when we first got back, and that was for us about making deeper connections than a Sunday morning, because on Sunday mornings we can have great conversations, we can get a coffee, we can be here early, we can chat, but it's only ever going to go so deep. And when things come up in life that you need to talk to someone who's in the Christian faith, who has the same beliefs, you need to know who to reach out to. And you may not want to always reach out to a leader, but you just need to have someone to be a sounding board. Sometimes it's just about encouraging each other. So for us, we knew we needed a Connect group. We needed that relationship, that friendship with Christians. We specifically wanted that because we have a lot of friends here on the Sunshine Coast, but we specifically wanted some church friends. And so we invested some time and energy into going to a Connect group. And then there was another Connect group that started earlier this year that we also started going to because we were like, everyone had similar age boys. So we're like, yeah, let's go to that one too. It got a little bit over the top. And then both of them in their season decided to stop. And we're like, oh, we don't have Connect group. And there was this moment where we're like, oh, maybe we should just relax and just have a term off. And then we both were like, do we do that? Do we not do that? And then there was this moment where we're like, no, we we don't want to let those relationships go. And I have to say, it was actually the relationship that we'd created with the Rogers. I don't know if they're here today, but Calissa and Jason Rogers, we had built this friendship. They weren't leaders, we weren't leaders, but we just built this friendship. And I'm like, no way, we don't want to lose that relationship. We don't want to lose that friendship, because all of a sudden we'd found like-minded people and we were starting to do life together, and I could see it happening, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to keep going. We need to do this. So like literally I reached out to Dan and was like, dude, we don't have a connect group. Can we start one? And he said, yes, let's figure it out. So we figured it out, and we're figuring it out now, aren't we? Are we doing okay?
You're doing great. You're doing
okay,
well.
thanks.
Fantastic.
Thanks, boss.
That's great.
So you're welcome to come to our connect group.
There you go. Recruiting,
Thursday nights at 7. Just saying.
Shameless plug.
using this as a recruitment tool.
Oh,
That's,
sorry.
that's all right. So Dan, Ecclesiastes 4 verse 12. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken, right? Many of you may not know, but as well as being my leader in terms of leading the children's ministry, Dan also looks after our pastoral care team. So Dan, from a pastoral care perspective, having those relationships, how important are they in a time of crisis or in a time of support?
Again, crucial, so important. In pastoral care, we see challenges in people's worlds that range there's just so many different layers and levels of it, from health to relationships to family, things. And the reality of it is people in our church do go through seasons of crisis, and that looks different for everybody. And it's there's so many challenging elements of that as well, of seeing people suffer. You don't want that for people. Seeing people go through heartbreak and different things. But I was just chatting to someone during the week about it actually, and one of the most amazing things that you get to see in a crisis that someone's going through is the church, people in church coming together and supporting them, and it's honestly just incredible. I mean, the pastoral team are themselves are just, I can't, there's no words to describe how amazing they are. But then just the friendships of people in church, people that aren't leaders, people that don't go, I better do this because I have a role to do or things like that, but people who are just friends of people and who love people and who go, yeah, you know what, I can pray for that person every Wednesday. I can go and mow that person's lawn. I can drop a meal off. I can, and the spiritual side of things in a crisis is important, but the practical and side of things is just as important as well. And that's one of the things that we see time and time again in different people's world of crisis is just being connected and being loved upon from people the way they need it in that time. And whether it's just an ear to listen to, a shoulder to cry on, or they want some advice or some encouragement, or just to go and do something completely unrelated, or just to even have a conversation that has nothing to do with what they're going through. That's powerful of, I'm going through this right now, but I just want to talk, let's just chat about everything else except for that,
And I can imagine, Dan, that, and I think, David, you have the experience, newcomer, church would get around them, but I would imagine that in times of crisis or we need support, those existing relationships that you've built and maintained are incredibly important. Yeah,
they are, absolutely. And that's one of the great fruits of having great relationships in church is you don't know what tomorrow looks like, you don't know what next week looks like, or what may come your way, and what crisis you may be facing in a month's time or whatever. And it's those friendships that you have and the people that are there for you and are in your world are the ones that know you better than anyone and can give you the strength you need and the encouragement you need, and they know what you need. Without you even having to tell them, they just read you and they know you. Like I said, there's so many examples I could use. When we were in our marriage crisis, there were just key people who just knew what we needed at that point in time. Whether it's something practical, praying for us, whatever it was. And you see that time and time again with people who do face a crisis, of just amazing, genuine-hearted people who are just there for them and got their back, and just go so far over and above. Like the things that go on behind the scenes of what people do is phenomenal. Really.
Fantastic. I'm going to stick with you, Dan. Pastor John often talks about, he has a saying, he says that, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. So we're going to pivot slightly and look at, we've talked about the positive things about maintaining relationships, the negative aspects in terms of the harm that certain relationships can have, either pulling you away from church or...
Yeah.
And I'm not starting with you for any particular purpose.
I bet. Just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Especially in my early days of church, I was very much in that living for Jesus, but party mode at the same time, and I was very determined to make it work, and it didn't. So save yourself the time and don't bother. But yeah, look, I look at the relationships I had then, and they're so different to what I have now. And you know, not saying they were bad. I mean, they were great people. Some of the relationships I had that I actually lost through different seasons are actually amazing people, and they were relationships for seasons. You know, I made the decision to to stop drinking about 12 years ago, and that lost me a lot of friendships that I had since I was 3 or 4 years old. Lifelong friendships of just.
Were you drinking at 3 or 4 years old?
Started young. No, I wasn't drinking. That's it. Rum and milk. It's good mix. No. Communion. I was taking communion very young, very regularly. Yeah, and like I lost a lot of friends of just, because I had to go to a place where I was like, I need to get serious with God and get plugged into church and make some decisions that are going to help me, and that cost me a lot of friendships. And again, I look back at them and, they hurt, and they were quite disappointing and surprising, and, some of the friendships I thought were, real genuine friends. And at the time they were, but again, it comes back to there was no depth there. There was no depth, and as hard as it was at the time, I look back, and what I lost, God replaced tenfold over. It's having those relationship, and there were a lot who were, I guess a ceiling on my spiritual growth, who were just just temptations and advice, and just the whole you're a Christian, you're going soft sort of thing, or whatever. People paying you out for going to church, or all those different things. And at the time, like, it is challenging, and I'm sure a lot of people have gone through that. And as much as it hurt me at the time, I just I look back now, and I just think, and I don't need those friendships, and God's replaced it with just the most amazing friends we could ask for.
Fantastic. That's great. Kat, I know you probably don't have that experience in terms of friendships that pull you away, but
Oh, you'd be surprised. So I was raised in church, and I'm a PK, and I think a lot of people can relate to the fact of being raised in a Christian community, but we all have to go on a journey, and I think you used the word authenticity before, and that I love that word, authenticity, because that's a word that I've really learned to embrace. And when you grow up in church, you can actually learn how to put on a church face.
no.
You really can, and I think mine was honed beautifully. Yeah. And I had a very good, and I think I genuinely, and the thing is, I always knew that God was real, and I always believed, and I always loved Jesus. But I didn't always make the right choices. And there was a time in my 20s, early 20s, I was living a life, and I was completely surrounded by non-Christians, because we were planting and helping. I was helping with a church plant in Vancouver in Canada. And so I had no Christian friends. Early 20s, no Christian friends, very susceptible to getting out there and getting to know people. I'm very social, as you may have noticed. I love people. And there was a time when I was just out hanging out with people at bars and clubs and everything, and not necessarily getting drunk or doing anything particularly wrong. But there was a moment when I was just really, my life was going not quite true north, and I could feel myself slipping. And it was getting, I was going out maybe every Friday night, and then it was every Thursday and Friday night, then it was every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, and I'm going to church with a headache, and I'm like, oh, what's going on here? And I literally felt God say to me, if you're comparing yourself to alcoholics, then you're always going to win. Maybe you should compare yourself to someone else.
Yeah, wow, okay. Ooh. Conviction.
Devastated. It was such a wake-up call because I realised my best friends were actually alcoholics. It was an eye-opener. I hadn't even accepted that truth yet. And I had this moment where I was like, God was raising my bar and saying the people around you need to raise.
Yes.
You need to raise the standards around yourself. And it started a complete overhaul of my life. Completely. I literally brought me back to Jesus. It was a repentance moment.
Yeah.
It was because of that I started reflecting on my decision making, and I came back to the fact that, hang on a second, I've actually chosen not to be with the man that God had placed in my life, and it was actually my husband Josh. And so it brought me back to where I was meant to be, and it really was a real comeback to Jesus moment, but it was all about the people that were surrounding me.
Wonderful. Great story. David, I mean, it's difficult because, you know, in Matthew 28, the final commission, Jesus says go, and he means to go into the world. He doesn't say go into churches and, you know, and baptize in the name of the Father and the Son. So I guess as Christians, we can't just surround ourselves with Christian friendships. So I guess there's that delicate balance between you need to have those around you who are not, and be able to sort of evangelize and be that example. How do you, I guess, straddle that balance?
Yeah, it's so true. There is a temptation in church world to surround ourselves and busy ourselves in the church, but our mission is out in the world. And so my wife and I, we're runners, so we've had to be very intentional because in the past I've had roles, significant roles in church denominations, and so my whole time generally could be taken up literally even to the exclusion of my family with God, with church. And that in itself seems really holy, but it's not, because we don't exist here solely to minister to each other, but to share our faith and to save the lost. And so it's been really good for us to be intentional about being involved in some running groups that are just people that run, and to be able to share, even just, it's just the comments initially, perhaps like, oh, what are you doing today? I've run with a guy this morning who's not a Christian, and so that's fabulous. If anyone wants to join me on a Sunday morning, it was only 10 Ks. I'm feeling really fabulous right now. Could use a Powerade. But yeah, like it's just to be intentional to have those people around you and to not just be surrounding yourself with Christians, but with non-Christians as well. I pray for this guy naturally. I'm looking for opportunities as we run, hoping that he slows down and listens to me. But yeah, looking for opportunities to share my faith or to share my perspective on how God sustains me in my day-to-day life. So just having those opportunities, being intentional about having not just Christian friends, but non-Christian friends, to be able to, still be having an effective faith, a faith that has some traction to it rather than just a holy roller sort of life,
Yes.
I guess you might say. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's great advice. And unfortunately, we are running low on time. And the one question that I had, which I think is a very important one, we don't often talk about it, is what happens when relationships in our church communities rupture, they fracture, right? They happen. We're not immune to we're humans, we're sinners. So I guess, and I'll ask you to be a little bit succinct, what happens in those times? Dan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, wow, great question. Oh man, and I guess that's the reality of it is, in church we're not perfect. We're all people just trying to do life together, and sometimes I think it can be the perception of, oh, they said this, that's not okay, I'm offended, they're a Christian, they shouldn't have done that. It's going to happen. You hang around long enough, you'll get offended, and it's the way you respond to that is the key. It's not about whether it's going to happen or not, and there's always opportunity to with people. It's what you do from there. It's, do you look at them and go, they should be a perfect Christian, they shouldn't have done that? Are my expectations unrealistic, or am I going to carry this around with me for the rest of my life now and be resentful? And so I think for me it depends on the circumstances and what's caused the fracture and who it's with. And but I'm a big believer in just talking it out on some level, whether it's the two of you sitting down together and saying, hey, look, this is not great, whatever happened, this is not going well, let's talk it out, if it's that sort of relationship, or even getting one of the pastors or a leader, your connect leader or something like that, and sitting down and I guess just having that heart of what we want to get through to the end of this for my spiritual walk, for yours, and you know, it just looks different depending on the circumstances, whether it's getting a leader involved. But I think an unhealthy way of dealing with it is telling everybody else about it, or throwing people under the bus, or you know, those sorts of things. That's incredibly toxic and not great behaviour. So
I think what Dan, at the beginning there, what you described, right, is in Matthew 18. So if you read that, Jesus goes through and he's talking to his disciples about how to correct, a fellow member. And at the end, there's the verse where it says, where there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name, there I am in your midst. So that sounds like what you're talking about. Yeah.
Just getting the right voices and just getting some wisdom on it. You know, even talking to a leader yourself and saying, hey, this is what's happened. How do I move forward from this? How do I deal with this? So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you said it before, but expectations is a really big one. I think if we all agree to expect that everyone here is human and that we are all going to fail together forward, it's okay, you know? And I just think if we can know that each one of us is human, we all know nobody's perfect. And we're not, even as our leaders who are so incredible, but they're human. We're all broken vessels, you know, and God's putting us back together piece by piece. And I just feel like if every one of us comes into the church relationship with an expectation that says, things are going to happen because we're human. And it's okay. And I'm human and they're human. And so when someone steps on our toes or forgets to invite us or, you know, overlooks us or, you know, this week I thought about it and I was like, oh, I actually hadn't heard that Matthew had gone to be with Jesus, and I texted a few people before I heard that, and I hadn't acknowledged they're really close friends, and I felt really bad, and I just reached out to them and said, I'm sorry, you know, I didn't know you were grieving at this time. And we have to acknowledge our mistakes and then just own them and just say it's, you know, humility is a big thing that will just bring unity to a church. And it's just owning it and going, I'm so sorry, because that's where that authenticity comes in. We're going to make mistakes, but we can do this together.
I love it. Beautiful. David, you got the last word.
Oh man, that was a banger of a question, Lani, I've got to say. Christians having disagreements, who's ever heard of it, right? Yeah, like it's so true, and it's just sort of like I think for me in the past where that's happened, because you know, like the thing with authentic relationships is we allow each other to speak truth, and sometimes the truth hurts, and sometimes we as humans want to move away from that. But I think the thing that pulls us back is our shared faith. You know, the central sort of concepts of our faith are things like God loves each one of us. And so once we can move, thank God that we have that backing behind those relationships, because then we can move past that initial hurt and affront, and we can go, you know, when we start to move into that space of, well, God loves that person even if I don't. And so why does God love that person, and why does God call me to love that person? And then start to move back into that space of reconciliation.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And as I said at the beginning, it's a big discussion, right? And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. But I think to summarize, I think we can all agree that yes, we are created to have a connection with God, but also that we are created to have a connection with each other, and creating, maintaining, and deepening those relationships, incredibly important both to the church and to ourselves individually. So if you can thank our panel. Wonderful. Thank you so much.